Woke up on a Tuesday morning to 47 notifications. That's not normal for me. I'm a freelance accountant working remotely, and most of my clients are on the West Coast, so my phone is usually quiet until around 10. 47 notifications before 8 in the morning meant something had happened. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and squinted at the screen. Most of them were comments on my aunt's Facebook post. I didn't even know she had tagged me until I scrolled down and saw it, a photo of my cabin in Lake Tahoe, the one I had spent 4 years saving for. The one I had closed on 8 months ago and had only managed to visit twice because work kept burying me. There it was on my aunt's Facebook page, my wraparound porch, my pine trees, my fire pit that I had personally assembled on a cold October afternoon, following a YouTube tutorial for 2 hours because the instructions made no sense. The caption read, "Family Getaway. So grateful for the blessings God puts in our lives. Love my family so much." My brother was in the photo, my mom, my aunt, my 2 cousins, all of them smiling on my porch, holding wine glasses, wearing matching pajamas like they had planned this week's in advance, because they had. They had planned this week's in advance, without telling me, without asking me, without even sending a single text that said, "Hey, would you mind if we use the cabin this weekend?" Nothing. I sat up in bed and read the caption again. I checked the timestamp. The post had gone up the night before, around 9 p.m. I had been on a client call until nearly 11 and had gone straight to bed after. So they had been there for at least a night already, maybe longer, celebrating on my porch with my wine glasses and my fire pit while I was debugging someone's payroll spreadsheet 3 states away. I put the phone face down on the mattress and just sat there for a second. Then I picked it up again and called my brother. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my mom. She picked up on the second ring, sounding cheerful and rested, which was somehow the most infuriating thing I'd experienced in months. "Oh, good morning, honey. Did you see Aunt Linda's post? Isn't the view gorgeous? We got lucky with the weather. It's been absolutely clear." I said, "Mom, what are you doing at my cabin?" Silence. Then, "We're just having a little family trip. Your brother mentioned you weren't planning to go up this fall, so we thought it would be a shame to let it sit empty." My brother mentioned. He said you told him it was fine. I had not told him it was fine. I had not told him it was fine. I had not told him anything, because he had not asked me anything. What had happened, I would later piece together, was that my brother had mentioned to my mom sometime in September that I probably wouldn't make it up to Tahoe before winter. That comment had somehow traveled through the family grapevine and transformed, through some process I cannot fully explain, into my blessing and my permission. I didn't say it was fine, I said. I didn't say anything, because nobody asked me. "Well, honey, we didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy." Right. Too busy to be asked. Not too busy to have my property used. I knew this pattern. I had grown up in it. My family operated on a system where good things that happened to one person were assumed to be accessible to everyone. When I got my first car at 22, a used Civic I had saved for over 2 years while working retail, my cousin borrowed it for 3 weeks without asking and came back with a cracked bumper and the excuse that he thought I wouldn't need it. When I got into my graduate program, my mom told the whole extended family before I had the chance to tell anyone myself, because good news is for sharing. When I bought the cabin, I made the mistake of mentioning it at Thanksgiving, and I watched my uncle's eyes light up in a way that made me uncomfortable before he'd even finished his 3rd helping of stuffing. The cabin hadn't been a secret, but it had been mine. I had bought it alone. I was not married. I didn't have a partner. I had just worked extremely hard for 4 years after grad school, lived in a studio apartment in Denver that cost me $800 a month, declined vacations, cooked almost every meal at home, and funneled every extra dollar into a savings account that I labeled Toho and checked obsessively every other week. When I finally closed on the property, I cried in the parking lot of the title company for about 10 minutes. Ugly cried. The kind where you can't really breathe properly. That cabin meant something to me in a way that was hard to explain to people who hadn't watched me work for it. My mother was still talking. Something about how they'd only be there a couple more days, and she'd make sure they left everything clean, and wasn't it wonderful that the family had somewhere to gather? I said, "Mom, I need you to hear me clearly right now. You are at my property without my permission. I need you to tell me exactly who is there, how you got in, and when you're planning to leave." Another silence. Longer this time. "I think you're overreacting a little." There it was. I had been accused of overreacting my entire life. When I was 15 and my brother went through my room and broke my CD player, I was overreacting. When I was 20 and my cousin borrowed money she never paid back, I was overreacting by bringing it up. Anytime I expressed that my boundaries had been crossed, the response was always the same. "You're being dramatic. You're being selfish. You're making a big deal out of nothing. This is family." "I'm not overreacting," I said. "I'm asking you a direct question. How did you get in?" It came out slowly, in pieces. My brother had a key. I had given him a spare key back in the spring when I'd first bought the place, because he'd offered to help me do some work on the back fence, and I hadn't been able to be there that weekend. I had given him the key for one specific purpose, for one weekend, and I had assumed, apparently incorrectly, that he understood the key was not a permanent invitation. He had also apparently given a copy to my aunt, which she had given to my cousin, so now there were at least 3 unauthorized copies of my house key floating around in the hands of people who had decided that asking was optional. My mom told me they'd leave on Sunday. It was Tuesday. I said I'd call her back and hung up. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table in Denver and thought about what I wanted to do. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to prioritize family harmony above my own sanity, said to just let it go. They'd leave in a few days. It wasn't worth the conflict. But another part of me, a part that had been getting louder in recent years, said that if I let this go, it would happen again. It would happen every year. They would assume the cabin was a family resource that I was generously managing on their behalf. My name would be on the mortgage, and they would treat it like a timeshare they'd inherited for free. I opened my laptop and looked up the number for my property management company. I'd hired them after buying the cabin to handle maintenance, check-ins, and emergencies. I called and asked to speak with my contact there, a woman I'd worked with since closing. I explained the situation. She was professional and calm and did not seem particularly surprised, which told me this was not the first time she'd heard something like this. I told her I needed the locks rekeyed and the door codes changed as soon as possible. She said she could have someone there by 5 o'clock that afternoon. Then I called my brother. He picked up this time. "Hey, did Mom call you? Pretty great up here. You should try to come up sometime before. How did you get into my cabin?" A pause. "I stood in my house, the key from when I helped with the fence. That key was for one weekend 8 months ago. I figured you'd want family to be able to use the place. I want to tell you that I said something brilliant and devastating here. Something that perfectly encapsulated the issue and left him with nothing to say. But honestly, I was so tired and so angry and so fundamentally exhausted by the years of this exact dynamic that I just said, I need you to understand that what you did is called trespassing. That is not a family visit. That is unauthorized access to private property." He laughed a little, not cruelly, more like he thought I was being absurd. "We're family. That's not a legal defense. You're seriously going to make this a whole thing? I want everyone out by tomorrow morning. We planned this trip weeks ago. Mom already took days off work. I understand that, and I'm telling you that this trip was planned without my knowledge or consent, using access you were not authorized to give. I want you all out by tomorrow morning or I'm calling the non-emergency police line and filing a trespassing report." He hung up. My mom called back 4 minutes later. She sounded different this time, less cheerful, more controlled. She said I was breaking the family's heart. She said she didn't raise me to be this way. She said the cabin was just sitting there empty and it wasn't hurting anyone. I said the cabin sitting empty was my choice to make. not theirs. I said I loved her, and I would talk to her after everyone had left the property. Then I ended the call. At 4:58, I got a confirmation text from my property management company. The technician was on site. New locks on the front door, back door, and garage. New keypad code. New spare key held at their office under my name only. By 5:30, my phone was ringing with numbers I barely recognized. My aunt, my cousin, a family friend who had apparently also been at the cabin and who I hadn't even known was there. My aunt left a voicemail that I did not listen to until 3 days later. My cousin sent a text that said I was acting insane. My mom sent a long message about family values and how hurt everyone was. My brother sent one text that said, "There's a locksmith here. What is wrong with you?" I sent back, "Please collect your belongings. The property management company will assist with access to retrieve your things. I hope the drive home is safe." I set my phone to "Do Not Disturb" and made dinner. That night I couldn't sleep, which I had expected. I lay in the dark and ran through every possible version of the conversation I could have had. Softer, harder, more detailed, less detailed. I wondered if I had done the right thing. I had spent so many years being told I overreacted that the accusation had gotten inside my head and nested there, and any time I stood up for myself, I spent the following days quietly auditing whether I'd been reasonable. But I kept coming back to the same thing. They had not asked. That was the part I couldn't get past. Not that they'd wanted to use the cabin. Maybe under different circumstances, if they had called me, if they had said we'd love to plan a trip up there, would you be okay with us going up the third weekend in October? Maybe I would have said yes. Probably I would have said yes. I wasn't trying to hoard the cabin away from everyone I knew. I just needed to be asked. I needed to be treated like the person who owned the thing, not like the person who maintained it on everyone else's behalf. The next morning, I called my bank and had the lock key cost, $280, documented. I also had my property manager do a walkthrough and send me photos and a condition report. There were wine stains on the outdoor cushions I'd bought last summer. One of the guest bathroom towels was missing. The fire pit had ash in it that hadn't been cleaned out. Small things, individually. But I documented all of it. Then I sat down and wrote a very calm, very clear email to my brother, my mom, and my aunt. I said that I loved them and I wanted to maintain a relationship with them. I said that the cabin was my private property, purchased entirely with my own money through years of personal sacrifice, and that access required my explicit prior consent every single time. No exceptions, no assumed permissions, no inherited spare keys. I said that the locks had been changed and no copies of any keys would be distributed to family members going forward. I said that if anyone entered my property without permission again, I would file a police report without a second conversation. I also said that I would be sending a Venmo request for the $280 lock rekeyed cost and that I would appreciate being reimbursed within 2 weeks. My aunt replied with a paragraph about how money shouldn't come between family. My brother did not reply. My mom called me that evening, and we talked for almost an hour. It wasn't a good conversation, but it was an honest one. She cried. I didn't. I had already done my crying months earlier, years earlier, in 100 smaller moments that had led me to this one. By the time we finished, nothing was resolved. But she understood that I was serious and that something had shifted in me that wasn't going to shift back. My cousin Venmo'd me the $284 days later with no message. That surprised me more than almost anything else in this whole situation. 3 weeks after everything, I drove up to Tahoe by myself. I got there on a Friday evening when the sun was going down behind the mountains and everything was orange and pink and very still. I unlocked my front door with my new key and walked inside and stood in the middle of my living room for a minute. I had the outdoor cushions professionally cleaned. I replaced the missing towel. I cleaned out the fire pit. Then I sat on the porch with a glass of wine and watched the lake go dark, and I thought about the 4 years it had taken me to get here, and the one night it had taken them to make themselves at home in something they had never lifted a finger to build. I thought about my brother's voice when he'd asked what was wrong with me. I thought about my mom saying she didn't raise me to be this way. I thought about my aunt's post, so grateful for the blessings God puts in our lives, and how I had been framed as a blessing that had been put in their path, rather than a person who had worked herself into the ground for something she was allowed to protect. The lake was very quiet. The stars came out. I went inside and locked the door behind me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the lock meant something. The reimbursement for the rekeying was the only thing any of them ever acknowledged in concrete terms. There was no apology, not a real one. My aunt eventually left a comment on one of my Instagram photos that said "love you always" with a heart emoji, which I suppose was her version of moving on. My brother and I didn't speak for 6 weeks, and when we finally talked again, it was about something unrelated, and we both let the cabin thing sit in the corner of the conversation, unaddressed, like a piece of furniture nobody wanted to move. My mom and I have a different relationship now than we did before. Not worse, exactly, but more honest. She knows I won't absorb the same things I used to absorb. I know she's not going to fully understand why it mattered to me as much as it did. We've found a kind of equilibrium in that, which isn't perfect but is real. I went back to the cabin for New Year's. By myself again. I made a fire in the pit and stayed up until midnight and watched the snow come in off the mountains, and I didn't feel lonely at all. That cabin is mine, every single square foot of it, and the only way anyone is getting a key is if they ask. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that week. Not the logistics of it, not the locksmith or the Facebook post or the unanswered phone calls, but the thing underneath all of it. The thing that made it possible in the first place. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to walk into someone else's home without permission. That kind of entitlement builds slowly, over years, out of small moments that were never corrected. Every time I stayed quiet when the boundary was crossed, I was teaching the people around me that the boundary didn't really exist. My brother kept that key for 8 months because nothing happened when he kept it. My mom assumed permission because she had assumed it before and I had let it slide. The behavior didn't come from nowhere. It came from a pattern I had partially created by never saying the thing that needed to be said. That's not me blaming myself for what they chose to do. What they did was wrong, and they made that choice. But I think there's a difference between being a victim of someone's actions and understanding your own role in the system that made those actions feel safe to them. I had spent years absorbing things I shouldn't have absorbed, and in doing so, I had accidentally communicated that absorbing things was what I did. The cabin was just the moment when I finally stopped. What I keep coming back to is this. The work I put into buying that cabin was years of quiet, unglamorous discipline. Nobody saw the years of $800 a month apartment living. Nobody saw the times I said no to trips, no to dinners, no to things I actually wanted because I was building towards something. The result, the cabin, the view, the porch, was visible. The sacrifice that produced it was not. And I think that invisibility is what allowed my family to treat the outcome as though it had simply materialized, as though it was a resource that existed independently of the person who had created it. That's a failure of understanding that goes deeper than one bad weekend. It's what happens when we see the results of someone's effort without respecting the effort itself. And the correction for it isn't anger, it's clarity. Clear expectations, clearly stated, with real consequences that actually follow. I sent that email. I changed those locks. I asked to be reimbursed for a specific dollar amount and I got it. None of those things felt natural to me at the time. I had to push against years of conditioning that told me asking for what I'd earned was somehow selfish or unkind. But here's what I know now. The most respectful thing I could have done for my family and for myself was to hold that line. Because the alternative wasn't peace. The alternative was another year, and another after that, of a dynamic where my hard work existed to serve other people's comfort, while I stood at the edges of my own life being grateful that nobody was openly angry with me. That's not family. That's a transaction dressed up as love. I'm not done with my family. I don't think they're bad people. I think they're people who had never been asked to behave differently, and now they have been. What they do with that is up to them. I drove back up to Tahoe in January. The snow was about 2 feet deep, and the lake was frozen at the edges, and it was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I unlocked the front door, my door, with my key, and went inside and made coffee, and sat by the window for an hour without looking at my phone. That hour cost me 4 years of my life to earn. It was worth every single one of them.